This will be a day long remembered. Now I am the master.
Welcome to another episode of Legends and Theories, and welcome to my review of the Fate of the Jedi series. And from what I could tell, this is the second longest series in Star Wars Legends, behind the Yuzhang Vong War in the New Jedi Order series. And this is a really interesting series, and is also the last big adventure of the classic characters Han, Luke, and Leia in Star Wars Legends. There is one final story that takes place after all of this, being the novel Crucible, which I will be reviewing soon. But this is the last major story and deals with some pretty crazy things. This ties heavily into the Mortis arc from the Clone Wars, introducing Abeloth, aka the Mother. And yeah, this story is just really crazy with how much stuff happens in it. And you really just get to see how the Star Wars galaxy has changed and evolved over all of the different legend stories. And with this is a story that heavily requires you to know not only everything that's happened in the Star Wars Legends continuity after Return of the Jedi, but also you need to know a lot of the characters in it, because if you don't, it gets even more confusing. And the novel Millennium Falcon is a prelude to this one, and if you go and read that, which I believe I've already reviewed, it does lead directly into the events of the first novel where Luke Skywalker is arrested, and all of this is based on everything that happened in, I don't remember what the series was named, but it's the one where Jason Solo falls to the dark side and becomes Darth Caedus. And with that, he's being blamed by Natasi Dala, who is the chief of state of the Galactic Alliance, which is what the New Republic became after the Yuzhang War. And with this, everything gets pretty crazy when Luke is exiled, which is the agreement he comes to, seeing that he needs to make an example that the law does apply to Jedi. And with this, everything with Luke gets pretty crazy as he goes into exile with his son Ben, and with it they go to discover how his nephew Jason fell to the dark side, and to really discover everything that happened with him, which leads him to discovering an ancient evil that has been recently unleashed named Abeloth. And they discover the lost tribe of the Sith, which is Sith that were separated and stranded on a planet, I think during the Old Republic era, and were stuck there until a sentient Sith battle meditation spear, I think, named Ship, went and began to get them into the galaxy. And with it, everything in the series is really interesting, with how Luke has to deal with attacks on multiple fronts from Abeloth, some of the corruption inside of the Alliance, and has to just really deal with so many different threats. And it's so interesting to see how Luke and the others have to deal with this. And the story is pretty interesting because characters like Natasi Dala, who is the head of state and is a former Imperial, doesn't really, feel too evil. She feels like she's just trying to do her best and just sees the Jedi as a threat. And with it, she is kind of, sympathetic, although she is doing it. I never really saw her, in this series at least, as evil. I know she has done evil stuff in like other Star Wars Legends stories, but in this one at least, she doesn't feel too evil and is sort of, the third antagonist of it. And she's behind the Lost Tribe of the Sith, and Abeloth is the ultimate evil in this, and everything with these insane Jedi, the storyline which kind of kicks it off, with Jedi going insane and thinking everyone was imposters, was really interesting to see and see how it was developed. And going with everything with Abeloth was really cool. And the story just going into so much more. There's so much I could talk about. It's really interesting to see just how the Jedi move through the politics of the galaxy and were trying to stay in the good graces of the Alliance, but also do what they needed to do. This is a really interesting story looking into what the Jedi should be doing and how involved with the government they should be. And a lot of the stuff is just some interesting questions that the sequels could have answered, but decided not to. And with it, it was pretty interesting when they ultimately decided to leave Coruscant at the end, realizing that they couldn't be disconnected to the Galactic Alliance. And yeah, honestly, everything was just so interesting. You get to see a Jedi coup of the Galactic Alliance and see them take down the government in Dala, who they think has been going way too far. And she basically has been. And yeah, honestly, everything was so interesting. Seeing the Sith take over Coruscant was also really cool, and the Jedi liberated, since they were setting a trap for them. Abeloth was a really scary and threatening villain, and was ultimately never defeated since the story was never able to be finished, with them looking for the Dagger of Mortis to ultimately defeat her, but since the Legends continuity ended, really they never got a chance to explore her final defeat. And you get some other really interesting characters. You get Ben Solo and him falling in love with one of the Sith named Vestar Kai and trying to turn her to the light side. And it starts to work until she just realizes that the darkness is part of her and she decides to return to being a Sith. But since she betrayed her people, she's basically stuck on her own. And I think joins with Darth Krayt, although not much is seen with him, and ultimately Darth Krayt's story isn't really expanded on until the Legacy comics, which are the latest point in the timeline, but takes place after Luke and everyone else has died. And the ultimate fight against Abeloth is really cool since it sees a forced alliance between the Jedi and the Sith, and with it just how they can't really trust each other, keep turning on each other, and is ultimately Luke Skywalker and Darth Krayt teaming up to go and defeat Abeloth, and that was a really cool thing. And just to look through everything else, it is just such an interesting story. Everything gets just so crazy, and the war with the Sith and Abeloth was really intense. And I really wish that Legends went on a little longer, so all the stories with this could have been finished up because you never really learn what happens to the Lost Tribe and what happens to Abeloth and everything. It is teased a little bit in Crucible with them still looking for the Dagger of Mortis, but it's not ultimately resolved, and the story is just really interesting. I had so much fun listening to this series, and I listened to it through audio books because honestly I don't have too much time to read, and that's why I went from the era where it was a galactic civil war to this, and this is one of the things is you definitely need to know everything and all the characters, as I said before, because if not, because I didn't know most of the events that happened, and all the major ones like the Yuzang War, Jason Solo's fall to the dark side, and all these other things, but ultimately it didn't matter because I just didn't know most of the characters, and that got me a little confused, but I was able to adapt in pretty quickly. I really did enjoy this series, and it's really a great story, and it's something I feel like the sequels just should have been, where it explores the Jedi and the Galactic Government going into new places and testing the limits between them and seeing what the Jedi Order should truly be. It is pretty interesting and was a story that I really enjoyed. You get some cool stuff like them being able to talk to the dead and getting some nice moments between Luke and Ben and Mara and a bunch of other characters. It was honestly just such an interesting story, and I really could say more, but I definitely think you should read the story to get the full experience. You can get all the books in audiobook form in their completed version, which is the only ones I will get, and even though there are other ones that have the shortened versions put up on there, I will only listen to the full audiobooks and hope that the Essential Legends collection does get stuff like the Using Von War, which I'll be slowly reading through, and we'll probably have reviews in parts because the series is like 18 books long. There's also a short story that takes place before this, where you get to see just a little bit more into the lost tribe of the Sith, and there was a fun little story. But with it, you have to find it online because it's extremely hard to find. It was only made available to people in like some Star Wars fan club, and there are versions of it posted online, so you have to look for it. And it's a nice little story. It doesn't really change much. You just get to take a look a little bit more into the character of Historica and her becoming a Sith on the path to it, since you do see her begin her training in the series. As a nice little addition to the story, but it doesn't really change much. And yeah, honestly, I really do like the story. I really would recommend to either read it or listen to the audiobook of it because it's a really compelling story and everything tying into Mortis and stuff was really cool. And yeah, honestly, that's really all I have to say for it. But I want to know what you think of this series. Please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you on the next episode of Legends and Theories. Thank you for watching this episode of Legends and Theories. Please subscribe, like the video, share the video, leave a comment, check out the video on screen, and may the Force be with you.